Hello everyone, welcome to my talk today. I'll first talk a little bit about myself so you get to know me, then about the company, and finally I'll get to the main topic and reason why you're here today, namely the journey from a single cloud to a multi-cloud for you and your organization. A bit about myself, my name is Damjan Gjurovski, I'm the CTO of Posedio. My kind of background is this classical software engineering, started as a software engineer, backend with Java and Kotlin, then moved towards TypeScript and React for a full stack engineering role, and finally went into DevOps and cloud platforms in the later stage of my career. I'm one of the co-founders of Posedio. We're a company founded in 2020. We have our focus on cloud and cloud migration or cloud modernization. With 2 locations in Austria, one in Vienna, the main office, and one in Vorarlberg. We currently are around 17 cloud experts, and we have a lot of customers and partners in the cloud space, which have helped us learn and grow. Today, I will talk to you about the leap from cloud to multi-cloud. So the idea is, how do you as an organization get from a single cloud to a multi-cloud approach so that you can reap the benefits that cloud providers offers and avoid some of the risks that you would face when you're faced with a single cloud solution. So the first question for me is, what is multi-cloud? And here I usually get started with, or usually companies get started with something like this, where they have some Power BI dashboards, some Excel, Office 360 tools that business units use. They have some application development, maybe in Kubernetes, maybe on VMs somewhere in a data center or on some cloud offering. The analytics team might use Google Ads, which might then feed into BigQuery, so they use GCP. There's some on-prem databases going on, so really there are some multi-cloud beginnings there, but is this really a multi-cloud setup? I would argue no, and I would use Wikipedia to back me up on that. So if you think of what is the definition of a multi-cloud, Wikipedia says it's basically a company using multiple cloud offerings in a single unified strategy. And this is the key point. This here, or this picture that you see here, is not a single unified strategy. So by the end of this talk, the goal for me is that you understand what are the benefits of using multiple cloud providers, what are some pitfalls when you try to go from one cloud to multiple clouds, and how you can really get the most out of your cloud setup. So first we start with the why, simply to explain what are the 3 main reasons that drive this move from a single cloud to a multi-cloud setup. And then once we know the why, we will move on to the how and see what technically we need to do to be able to go to a multi-cloud setup. So the first and perhaps the most important reason from a technical perspective for us is using the right tool for the right job. And this means that usually clouds or cloud providers specialize in certain areas. Like GCP maybe specializes in data management, BigQuery, big data, AI, ML models, and so on. Azure perhaps specializes in Windows services, .NET development. AWS, we know, has the Lambda offering, has the earliest cloud offerings. So all of these kind of specialize in some sort of way in some niche areas where you could benefit from using the specialized tools. At the same time, the team that develops or the team that works on a problem is the team that knows best what the solution is or what they need to develop a solution. So again, we go back to right tool for the job, and you need to let your team that works on the problem decide what that right tool is. And finally, we want to unlock the full potential of your organization, which means not just one team working on a specialized solution, but having multiple teams that can make decisions in a decentralized way to drive you forward towards your goal as an organization. The second why is usually managing risk. This starts usually with big enterprise companies with avoiding vendor lock-in. People have been burned by that before, so they really are keen to avoid it. We see that also some cloud providers take a page out of the book of, now they're locked in with us, let's increase prices. We want to utilize the best priced offering between different cloud providers. So we want to be able to look into what costs are there, total cost of ownership, what is the price pressure we get, what is the contract negotiation advantage we have, and try to utilize this as a bargaining chip and choose the best offering for our services. And finally, perhaps a bit less financial risk, but real risk nevertheless, we want to make sure we have business continuity. In case a cloud provider shuts down or a region shuts down, or for whatever reason, compliance, governance, legal, whatever, we're not allowed to use them anymore, we want to make sure we have a backup plan. This is usually covered under this FinOps topic. So how do you optimize costs in the cloud? This is again one main reason that drives companies and organizations to move to a multi-cloud approach. The final and perhaps the worst, and some might say most common case, is it just happens. So there is this term called shadow IT. In essence, what that means is the teams decide what the problem is, the teams decide what the solution is, and sometimes they don't like hearing no for an answer. So they go around your IT department and they build their own solutions to be effective at what they do. And there are some estimates that there's around 15 to 25 times or the amount of cloud offerings or cloud products used in an organization is 15 to 25 times larger than what the IT department estimates. And this is usually the case because you don't pay attention to the first two reasons. You don't trust the teams to make the decisions, and you don't look at the cost. And you end up with a shadow IT where you still have multi-cloud, or you have the basis of a multi-cloud without this single IT strategy, which is the key component. So now that we know why we want to do it, let's take a look at the how. I will outline the steps that we take to ensure this long-term success of multi-cloud solutions. But in order to do that, first I want to take a look at the basics. So what steps do we need to take, or what components need to be there in order to be able to guarantee success for a multi-cloud setup? So we start with the base setup. We see here on the slides three different aspects from the three different cloud providers of the same thing. The idea here is that we need first to assess what the organization needs. So we need to see how many departments there are, how they're organized, what their work is, are there any cross-cutting concerns, what type of risk averseness the organization has, do we have any governance setup, any security requirements, is this a highly regulated industry, and so on. This is something that in the first step we assess. We assess the existing solution on the original cloud or the old cloud, and then we need to define conventions how this should look in the new cloud setup. So here we want to set up naming, set up labeling, set up folder structure, some sort of centralized governance and security, but also decentralized decision-making that enables the teams to get their job done. We want everything structured or built up with infrastructure as code tools such as Terraform, so that it's reproducible, so that we can recover from whatever outages might be there. We want to take a look at sustainability perhaps, so green cloud solutions. This would enable us later to do FinOps, asset management. So this is really the base layer that doesn't really bring that much functionality, but is then a key enabler for all the benefits that we later want to reap from our multi-cloud setup. Once we have this, the next key component is networking. So we want to make sure that our solution works and can connect to the existing solution. This means we need to set up networking on-prem to the data center. It means we need to set up networking to the other cloud provider. We need to have perhaps networking to a VPN that connects to the work machines of other developers, perhaps business and so on. And we need to make sure that IP addresses are allocated correctly. And this is really a nightmare. So I don't want to get now into this, but in general, you should be careful how you set up IP ranges, because IP range conflicts are a nightmare to deal with and will stop you from connecting your cloud solutions. Once we have the networking set up, obviously the first step is to connect everything. Second step is to stop everything from connecting, so security. Here we also want to live by the principle of least privilege. We want to have some key guardrails in place that don't allow us to abuse the system or gain access from one system to the other. We want to control traffic. We want to control communication between the two cloud providers and within the cloud itself. We want to, if at all possible, avoid long-living credentials, something that is very easy and very common in cloud setups. We don't want to have service accounts, keys lying around. And we want to, and this is a key and often overlooked aspect, hook into the company user lifecycle management. What I mean by this is, if a new user is onboarded in the company, they should immediately have an identity and access to the cloud resources so they can do their job. But at the same time, if a user leaves the company, access should be automatically revoked from all systems and not forgotten and then left for someone to clean up manually. And also an often overlooked part, if a user changes departments, the permissions that the user has needs to follow him to the other department. Means if a user was in the marketing department and got to see all the leads, now moves on to accounting department, they should not be able to see the leads anymore, but should be able to obviously see the bills and the accounting data. This means that we need to leverage solutions that will allow us to share this identity between cloud providers and to share these permissions and management of access between cloud providers, ideally in a zero trust environment, where we can guarantee that secrets are not leaked and where we can guarantee the security of the overall organization and applications within. And the final concept that we need to have in order to call our solution a multi-cloud solution is shared services. So this is this concept of a unified architecture and a unified strategy. It's important that we have one entry point, but teams can decide which cloud they want to deploy to. It's important that there's a golden path for developers so that they don't need to spend time relearning the cloud and learning new things that perhaps are strange or counterintuitive to the things that they're used to, which enables mistakes. And we need to make sure that migration between the clouds is easy. So once an application is set up in one cloud, if the team decides that this is not a good match for their requirements, they should be able to move that application almost seamlessly to the other cloud provider without the users noticing and with very little effort on the development and infrastructure teams. And this is something that is often quite a challenge. Usually people set up the deployment on both sides, but forget to have this moving capability between the two clusters. So now that I mentioned the 4 pillars that we need for having multi-cloud, the question is, do we now finally have multi-cloud? And I would argue that this is not enough. There's still one key component missing. And this is the fact that multi-cloud goes both ways. So when we look at setting up multi-cloud by onboarding a new cloud, we follow these components. We follow infrastructure as code. We follow proper identity and access management. We follow all the best practices that we have, but we often forget to look at the old cloud and the old setup, where things are perhaps still set up with ClickOps, where some security is not perhaps up to the latest standards, where we're missing some best practices. So to actually have proper multi-cloud that is successful for the organization, it's important to backport this knowledge that we gain from the new setup into the old setup, to make sure that the team can grow, the team can learn, that the old setup is maintainable. So the name of the game is multi-cloud and not cloud replacement. And finally, we want to make sure that we have ideally a single cloud platform team that takes care of both infrastructures so that we don't end up with these silos in the company and avoid the internal politics of who gets to deploy what and where. So once we have this, I would argue we're ready for multi-cloud. And to summarize, this is the journey that we usually take with our customers that takes us from a single cloud to a multi-cloud solution. So first, obviously, we need to assess the existing solution, which would help us lower the risks and enable the teams to make these decentralized decisions. So pushing the decisions down to the level where the most knowledge is. Then the next step is to set up the new cloud solution. This must always follow best practices. It must be done in infrastructure as code, and we should not repeat the mistakes that we've made potentially in the initial cloud setup. Next step is to ensure interoperability. So we want to make sure that what works in one cloud works in the other, with some exceptions. We want to make sure that migration is easy, deployment is easy, usability or developer experience is at a high level or at the same high level on both clouds. And the final step, of course, we want to constantly improve. We want to co-develop both cloud setups. We want to make sure that the knowledge gained is shared within the teams. And we want to make sure that we have a long-living, successful parallel cloud setup for our organization. And with that, I thank you for your attention.